Hello everybody, this is Michael Hollands once again for Sound of the Movies. Today I have the pleasure to be joined by film producer and CEO of Storm King Productions, as well as co-founder of Storm King Comics, Sandy King. Sandy has produced several of John Carpenter's films, including Vampires, In the Mouth of Madness, Village of the Damned, They Live, Body Bags, Ghosts of Mars, and the TV miniseries Suburban Screams. Furthermore, she produced the Amazon Blumhouse film The Manor. Before Sandy became a producer, she had worked as a script supervisor on The Thief by Michael Mann, Rumblefish and the Outsiders by Francis Ford Coppola, 16 Candles by John Hughes, Long Riders by Walter Hill, Starman, Prince of Darkness, and Big Trouble in Little China by John Carpenter. It is my pleasure to welcome Sandy King.
Hi. Good morning.
Hi there. It's great to have you on my show. Thank you very much for taking the time out of your schedule.
My pleasure.
Sandy, as I mentioned in my short introduction, you worked as a script supervisor on many pictures. You worked with Michael Mann on The Thief. You worked with Francis Coppola on Rumblefish, 16 Candles, John Hughes, Long Riders, Walter Hill. You worked as a supervisor, obviously, with John Carpenter, who's your husband, and you worked on Starman, Prince of Darkness, and so on. Looking back at those days, Sandy, what's the most unique and educational process of filmmaking?
Well, I think in my career in film, I just kept walking through open doors. I came from an art background at UCLA, and but all my best friends were right next door in the film department. And when I realized I would starve to death as an artist, animation seemed like a logical place to go and a fun place to go. So I wound up working with Lewis Hall and Carlos Gutierrez in doing educational films. And then one that the three of us did together was Antimatter. So that one won the first Academy Award animated short film. They got the award, which was, I'm not saying I was cut out. They produced it. I was an inker. But coming from that, I knew how to do screen direction, how things moved in literally each frame. So that's what I picked up through animation. Then I decided more sociability was there in live action. So I was given a choice on an AFI film between cater and continuity. I thought, okay, I'll try for continuity. If I don't get that, I'll cook. And it worked. I came in through that. Some of those animation AFI fellows went on to become cinematographers and directors. And I kept those alliances. So kind of everything I've done added up to me becoming a producer.
I know that some people are not necessarily familiar with the task of a script supervisor. I know that it can encompass many different things, and you may serve as a liaison also of some sort. So, what do you think is the most important task of a script supervisor?
Getting inside the head of the director, helping him realize really everybody works for the director's vision. He's hired by studio, production company, whatever it is, for his vision. All the rest of us pitch in to make that happen, whether we're the producer or wardrobe supervisor. We get in his head, we stay in his head, and we try and make it so that he has those tools to implement that vision. I remember when I was doing an AFI film when Vilmos Stigman was shooting it. A bunch of people like that used to volunteer to work on AFI films. And I was complaining it was 115 degrees out in the Mojave Desert. And, there seemed to be a lack of focus on this guy's part. And he was the son of a friend of Vilmos's from Hungary. And I'd say, oh, why don't you just take this part over and show him how to do these things? He said, I am not hired for my vision on this film. The day I am, we'll do it my way. Until then, we do the director's vision. And at age 20, that had the impact on me that guides me now through the rest of my film career. So as a script supervisor, my job was to be the liaison between the editorial crew, the shooting crew, and post-production staff.
Gradually, you started to work your way up, and then you had also become an associate producer on They Live in 1988. It's one of my favorite films of the 80s. Your husband John directed it. You were the associate producer. I think Larry Franco was the producer. There is more than meets the eye to it. It also features a large amount of social criticism. And do you think it may be even more relevant today than it was 30 years ago, more than 30 years ago?
I think what makes it so relevant today is that those conditions never changed. We hoped at that point in time that there'd be another 70s style revolution that would be more sophisticated, because those of us that had gone to jail in the spring of 70 and those kinds of things would be like, oh, wake up, we need to go back at it. That didn't happen. Everybody was in their BMWs with tinted windows and cell phones. So I think the reason it's so powerful today is that everybody just was sedated, and that message from back then held true. So when people go, oh, John can see the future, it's like, well, we saw the present back then.
Reaganomics, I think that's the term they used back then. I think what John did, or what you did with this picture, was really spot on, and it certainly, well, it hasn't gotten that much better. I mean, it's always hard to say today things are better or worse, or back then it was better or worse. I mean, there are many nuances that may trigger a certain comment or behavior, but I think or especially in today's world with all the social media aspects, or what has become so huge, it's even a different world. And I think it's hard to really oftentimes navigate through, even simple everyday situations, if that makes sense. Probably know what I mean.
Rumor has become psychic fascism, so that essentially there is an off-site war going on that has just fed these ferocious idiocies that I don't think any of us anticipated back when we made They Live. The other thing we started missing was the activism of our genre. And people went into splatterpunk and stuff like that instead of horror that addressed, that used horror for what it is, which is an allegorical medium that addresses current culture and current society, besides the fears that exist within us. And when horror got jokey, when horror quit addressing what's going on under the surface, you lost part of the Greek chorus saying, watch out. So now we have rampant fascism, and we have social media and everything else making it okay and brainwashing in another way.
You've been in this game for a very long time. And when do you think Hollywood and the film industry started to change, especially in terms of how the studios operated and how decisions were being made, and the whole structure and even atmosphere of the business as a whole?
When they got bought by mega corporations and hedge funds who had nothing to do, didn't have no heart for filmmaking or art. It's real interesting. They started seeing how much money yet another corporation they could just add to their portfolio could bring in as an ancillary to what they were doing. They don't give a shit about movies. You watch something like Discovery just eat television stations and everything else they can get their hands on. You watch Viacom just sell off pieces because it's no longer the toy they want. It's old guys were no angels, but they got off on movies and they coordinated with each other who was making what kind of movies. So, you had gold lame stuff going on over at MGM, and you had great noir stuff going on over at Universal and Republic. And you knew where your Westerns were coming from. And so they kind of respected each other in a weird way, except on certain individual clashes. But they loved movies. And for whatever seediness was beneath the surface, they were sitting down with their popcorn when they watched your cut and really were looking forward to, wow, this is going to be our big summer movie. And then they all had divisions where they made what would be considered experimental or maybe future classic movies that were lower budget. But out of that sprang a lot of interesting noir stuff, intellectual stuff they acquired from Europe. So they essentially, like a stock portfolio, they were making a balanced portfolio of movies. These guys don't anymore. It's really rare. And I think part of that moved to the streamers who got the kind of, again, the gamblers. If you don't have a sense of gambling and being willing to take risks, so that, yeah, you kept doing your dependable tent poles, which is great. Disney, everybody wanted to see the next fairy tale. That's fantastic. But you also want to see a daring one like Pirates or whatever else they were going to take a flyer on.
Yeah.
And now, they run their logarithmics instead of listening to their guts. And that becomes as artists, becomes a lot less interesting. I used to go in, John and I would go together, and the head of the studio would say, "What do you got?" And I go, "Well, we got this one or this one, and don't want anything, no harm, no foul. See you next year." And you really went, the studio heads went with their guts. They didn't ask 4 other people for their opinions. And so you have very personalized studios. And we were able to know, like, okay, Tom wants this, Harry wants whatever. And it made it good. Not, this was not Angel Town. It's still rough trade. Whatever you didn't have in paper on a contract, they could still screw you over for. But I think there was more diversification in the movies.
Yeah, I agree. And thank you for elaborating on that, Sandy. And many things today just feel so corporate. And I think a lot of the freedom, quote unquote, was also lost to a certain extent. And, I tried to rewatch as many movies as possible over the last couple of days and weeks. And I was watching, In the Mouth of Madness or Vampires or Starman. And especially In the Mouth of Madness is one of my favorite horror movies of the 90s. And I don't think if the film were made today by a different director other than John Carpenter, I don't think it would be the same film. And also with a different producer. And I think it's a very atmospheric film. I think it has very good actors. The story is intriguing. These are all characteristics which I think today's movies often lack. I'm not talking about all the movies, but certain films. And also, in terms of your skills as a producer, what do you think makes a producer a good producer? What are some of the essential, let's say, skills you should have and must have in this business? So either, people skills, problem solving skills.
The biggest one is listening, and all the knowledge you build up because I came up being on the set, because I came up from animation and different things, I can talk to all the different departments. I can understand their problems. Anyone that works for me in the production department has to spend a week in every department so that when wardrobe comes in and says they have a problem with the washing machines or their trailer isn't work, they understand how that impacts every shooting day, how a piece of wardrobe takes down a character, which means the actor's in hysterics, which means the director's going to be in hysterics. That there's a whole holistic chain that goes on. So that's just the making of the movie. But I think that because of the directors I was lucky enough to work with, I also got a pretty strong story sense and how things work and story structure. And I'm very lucky to be married to a director who's a great writer, who is one of the ultimate structuralists. So that helps me prepare things for him when there's a story that intrigues him. I can do a lot of groundwork there. And knowing studio bottom lines, that kind of thing, just from years of experience, I can know when the studio's bullshitting me about a number they want me to back into, and I just look at them and go, don't make this movie unless you have the money to make it. So you have to be realistic in order to step off the cliff into fantasy. And that's on all those fronts. You just know from living long enough what's going to work and what isn't. I mean, every once in a while, there's some surprises. I don't think there's any movie, no matter how much we thought, hey, this is going to work and we've actually got enough money. And then you just sit there and just go, you learn from every failure and you never forget those failures. They're added to your file box of information you go to on the next one.
Thank you. And Sandy, what do you think today's filmmakers, especially in the field of horror, get right, and what leaves room or large room for improvement? Because I feel there is a big abundance of CGI these days, with not enough emphasis on the atmosphere of the film, the story of the film. What do you think about that?
I think they cut short their educations. They're not literate in film, so they don't know what's already gone before. Like, I don't think you can be a writer without being a reader, in the same way that I don't think you can be a filmmaker isolated at the bottom of the sea. I think the more films you've seen from all eras, not just what's current and hip, because then you're just following. To be innovative, to be bringing fresh storytelling to the screen, I think, first of all, they need more education. As artists, you need the skills. You need to have watched other people's techniques. But a lot of them forget what's the story within the story. They're going, oh, I've got this great kill, and then there's this thing that does this and that. Go, but what's the story? What is it that's going to resonate inside? When you think back, my two favorite eras, Universal Classic Horror and all the guys working in the 80s horror, there's always a story within it. And in Universal Classic Horror, what a lot of the new people just, rushing in to make new versions of a Frankenstein or a Dracula or whatever, they forget in those movies, the monster was the victim. They weren't the bad guy. But if you don't watch those things and say, read the original novel of Frankenstein, things like that, they miss that nuance, which gives you a whole other story within what's happening in the movie. George Romero, come on, talk about being timely. Zombies that are created in a way that is so analogous to what we're doing to each other, or plagues or COVIDs or any of those things. There's a bigger deal happening. There's all these other things because it's allegorical. So you pick all those things up, and you've got Cronenberg, body dysmorphia, all
Yes.
of those things hold up because they speak to a truth within us. John's movies hold up because they speak to who are you. That's what I see missing in people that think, oh, make a horror movie, it's cheap and it's easy to do, just throw blood on the wall.
There is an art to filmmaking and also to horror filmmaking. I was recently rewatching, Body Bags, for instance, which he produced in the early 90s for Showtime, back then, a television production. I was curious, Sandy, as to what you might be able to tell me about, working with actors, working with people such as James Woods or Sam Neill, Julie Carmen, and what is essential when it comes to dealing with these people and actors in general.
We've had some of the best, David Warner, Sam Neill, Jeff Bridges. Um, you know, those are great experiences, and it's what we aim for, to bring in people who normally do what you'd consider straight drama, thrillers, anything like that, because again, it enriches the movie experience. You can't, in my opinion, just populate with whoever the current pop horror person is. It either gets jokey, you're ribbing on the square, but you're also taking people out of the movie by putting in these faces that they expect to go into whatever horror character they're used to, all of that kind of thing. So we tend to go with the workhorse people, the Mark Hamill, Thomas Ian Griffith, Julie Carmen, Natasha Henstridge. All those people they have what I consider a more European work ethic, which is they show up, they hit their marks, they make it life so easy on a set. There's no drama. So casting is really important, but all the way through the extras, if you can't make it and ground it in reality and in the diversity of our world, which is a big thing, because what I find a lot of movies now do is they forget they're on planet Earth, that when you walk down the streets of Los Angeles, New York, Chicago, there's diversity, there's disabled people, there's multicolored people, all of that. Then you're not grounding in reality before you take off and do the imaginary and wild. So, but you work with Sam Neill, you have a great time, and you go to Beach Boy concerts. It's a pleasure to show up in the morning. David Warner, who will be missed forever, was delightful. I'm like, come on, Keith David, one of the kindest men, and come on, he can do anything. So, and Kurt Russell, come on, you're gonna have a good time, you're gonna get a great movie.
Thank you, Sandy. And before we talk about Storm King Comics, I would like to get your thoughts on working with Amazon Studios on The Manor, which you also produced, a film which I also enjoyed. And what was your experience like working with the people of Amazon? And also Blumhouse was also involved, am I right?
Oh yeah. We had started out as an Amazon movie, and then Amazon during that time made a deal with Blumhouse, so we got rolled into that. So we were serving multiple masters, which gets interesting, in trying to figure out which edict coming down which day you're supposed to be following. I wouldn't recommend that to anybody. I think they've worked to solve a lot of that chain of command problem that they were having at Blumhouse at the time in their television division, which was different than their film division. But they were pretty rough at the time, just decisions that made it hard to make sure you were getting all the money on the screen, taking the stress off the director. A lot of things have to do with make one decision and we'll implement it and you save money. But I think we came through it pretty well. Amazon, our execs at Amazon could not have been more supportive and easier to deal with. And my concern had been sometimes the two companies disagreed. And so the biggest thing to do there is for me in the producer position to just not pretend it wasn't going on and to just have to go to Amazon, who was the ultimate boss, and go, all right, which of these decisions do you want me to implement? Because you guys are going two different directions. And I know you're the ultimate destination. So tell me what you want and we'll do it. But I don't want to hand you something that you're not expecting to get. So those are one of the complicating factors in producing where I prefer not to play the political game of blaming somebody else or doing something else or hiding anything. And if somebody tries to put me in that corner, I'm not going to do it. It's more like, okay, guys, I'll come in because you're not talking the same language. And the agreement up front was to do this. Now, have both of you made this decision to change, or is something funky going on? So that's the times it gets more difficult to just get the job done.
Thank you, Sandy. And now let's talk about Storm King Comics, which I think was established in 2012. And there's been a lot going on ever since. I mean, you have released the Asylum series, Tales for a Halloween Night, Tales of Science Fiction, Storm Kids, Night Terrors, and I think there is more to come. And Sandy, please walk me through the inception or the first days of Storm King Comics and how it was created. I think also in collaboration with Thomas Ian Griffith, who was also in Vampires. He played the Master Vampire, of course.
Thomas is a great writer and a great guy. We had a show that we wanted to develop for television, John and Thomas and I. Had a great premise, all this stuff. But it was back in the days pre-Breaking Bad, where every place we talked to about it was really concerned it was too dark, which used to be the story of our existence for a few years, particularly after 9/11, when they go, oh, this is too dark. We were in a studio having a meeting where supposedly they wanted it to be a series. But, every once in a while you get that creepy feeling where they just want to advertise that they're doing a series with you, but they're not really going to go into production, which is like waste everybody's time. I'd rather stay home and write or do something else. In the series, it's shorthand, angels and demons and Lucifer's coming through in the city of Los Angeles is a joke on God. So they're saying, well, can't we do this in a sleepy little town and upend expectations? And I said, well, first of all, no, we're not going to North Carolina so you can shoot non-union and all that, because Los Angeles has the seasons with the Santa Ana fires and it looks like hell on earth, and that's why it's set there. And she said, well, it's not like it's a graphic novel or anything. And I thought about it a second. Actually it is. And we always do all this art for every film and movie, TV presentation. And I get kicked under the table by 6'5" master vampire and by an agent on the other side. And we walk outside the door and he goes, what the fuck was that? And I said, we're doing a comic book. And I come home. John says, so how'd it go? We're doing a comic book. He goes, what do we know about comics? I said, absolutely nothing. We'll learn. So we spent 2 years researching the business and the art of comics. And we had great people like Steve Niles and Tim Bradstreet and Bruce Jones who helped us with what it takes. I mean, it's like people who say, I can make movies. I've seen lots of them. Well, it's one thing to have read lots of comics, and it's another to create them in a different um, format. So we studied, and then that's how Asylum came about, where initially we turned over our writing IP to Bruce Jones. And it was very funny because I would read these scripts and think, God, these are great. And then I'd realize on looking at them that they became police procedurals with threesomes in them, and the IP was going out the window. I thought, how did he convince me these were right when the IP is kind of out the window? And everybody laughed because I didn't know that that's what he turned all scripts into. So that's when I got into writing them myself, because I took apart his scripts and went, okay, what are the fundamentals? What does it take to get the page turns, the splash pages? How do you make the dynamics work? But once forced into the deep end of writing the comics, they're fun. And then it just took off from there. And then when we won some awards for Asylum, I grew fangs like a vampire. I couldn't stop.
As I understand, you also work with writers from all over the world. And so please walk me through the process a bit. How do you conceptualize a story? I mean, you have to have an idea, and maybe you will brainstorm with John. Then you write a few lines, and then the writers also flesh it out. Please correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, please walk me through it. How long it actually takes to really prepare everything, to have it drawn out, to be precise, to have a storytelling process. What do you find most difficult?
Happens in two ways. Sometimes it really is that we have an idea. In the anthologies, the yearly anthologies we put out at Halloween, Tales for Halloween Night, that's usually 12 stories. First story is always written by John. My last one's always written by me. In between, it's all different writers and artists, like a box of chocolates of horror. Those are only 13 pages. I say they're easy to do because they're short. Short stories are really difficult. Those are fun in that everybody's doing different ones and we're pacing them out, and there's no two ghost stories, stuff like that. On other books, I recruit writers from movies, novels, and comics for the most part. And I just find whose writing I think is really moving. And then if it's a story generated by an idea John and I have, I turn it over to, it can be, there's a great British writer, Mike Sizemore. There's a great female writer, Amanda Dibert. So depending on the closest writers to me, I may hand over one of those to them, have extensive story meetings with them, and then send them off. But we all stay in constant touch. If a writer comes to me, one that knows me, and I say, and they want to do something, I'll say, send me 3 ideas and tell me which is your favorite. And we start there. So it's really just a constant mulling and honing. I don't accept outside solicitations. I hunt the writers down. They don't find me, because I know there's a certain level we want to keep it different from other comics. I think we have a kind of unique voice. And same thing with the artists. I'm constantly cruising portfolios. I feel like I try to leave no trace where my footprints are, but for the most part, I think we make pretty good teams. I try and marry up people who aren't used to, have never met. And then we make that a team that's in constant communication, which is a little different than if you went to DC or Marvel.
Thank you. And Sandy, do you plan on turning one of the comics into a film?
I want to make the best comic possible. If that perks the interest of a studio and they say, wow, that would make a great series. Yeah, well, then maybe. All the writers retain their IP. I just license it for comics because I saw that a lot of people in the comic industry got ripped off by losing their rights. So I created my contracts so that they don't lose their rights.
Earlier on, I mentioned how big it has become, ever since you started, Storm King Comics 10 years ago. What else do you want to come up with? You've added science fiction to horror. What else do you plan on accomplishing in that field?
Surviving. It's pretty much of the moment. I feel like we have a pretty full set of imprints, because we go from Storm Kids, the kid comics, all the way up through our original adult lines. Yeah. And by bringing out Dark and Twisted this year, where it's non-horror sci-fi but horrific, it's more serial killers and that kind of stuff, more reality based. I think we fill out our intent. I'm happy there. I don't need to be the biggest comic company in the world.
If I may ask, Sandy, what else is next for you, either film-wise or in other departments, ventures? Do you plan on releasing another film down the road?
Yeah, I mean, the only holdups to everything is, but two things have held up TV shows and movies, which were COVID shutting down things, and then there were all these acquisitions and mergers. I mean, I think Discovery bought half of Hollywood. It's very hard to figure because, like, we had a TV series that we'd worked on for a couple years over at TNT, Paramount and TNT. And one morning, the agents and Paramount and I all woke up with an article in Daily Variety that TNT had canceled all scripted programming. Nobody had a clue, including the executives. In the amount of time they had to give the interview and send out a press release, couldn't they have called us? So that happened because that should have been shooting now. We've had weird stuff go on. It depends who buys what or who dumps it. So you think the same thing happened. We had an adult animated show at Netflix. We spent a year there on it, gone through all the approvals, 9 episodes, pilot written. It was going to animatics. They had just approved $1 million for the animatics. Awesome. Literally 1 week later, we get a phone call that first it was that our executive was fired, but that wasn't it. The whole division was jettisoned. So it's like, you can't take it personally. And they're ending the division, and we went with it. So hard to be allowed to say anything until like the week before it shows, because they seem willing to cut things no matter where. We have an NBC Universal show that's shot right now. We're in editing right now for 6 episodes to come out in October. Pretty sure I'm not supposed to mention it, and I'm not sure if it's because they plan to cut it or if it's because it's, they want to do a big splash, but that's what we're doing right now.
Thank you very much for doing this interview. I really had a great time talking to you, and I hope you enjoyed the conversation as well.
Oh, yes.
Thank you very much. Stay safe,
Thank
stay
you.
healthy, and I'm looking forward to chatting again down the road.
That'd be great. Thank you very much.
You two take care. Bye.